Thanks, thanks very much, Angie. I'll just wait for Maya to share her slides. The slides.
There we go. Hopefully you can see it.
Yep, indeed. So welcome everybody to this session on the pleasures and pitfalls of publishing your research, which is being hosted by the Research SIG. I'm Amanda Cossham. I'm a lecturer at the Open Polytechnic. In fact, I was until last week a lecturer, and now I'm currently the research manager there. I've changed jobs. And my co-host is Maja Krtalić, who's one of the lecturers at Victoria University in the School of Information Management. We're very pleased to see you here today, and hi to everyone who isn't able to make it in real time and is watching this later on. We will take questions as we go through, but there'll also be a space at the end. And if you don't want to ask a question, we've got our contact details on the final slides. Maya.
Kia ora, lovely to see you all here. So today we talk about research and we talk about publishing. And I will start just by defining what we mean by research in this presentation, so we are all on the same page. So as you know from your own experience, research can mean many things, but in this presentation, by the term research, we mean anything that a practitioner researcher might have done, including formal research projects, either on your own or in a team. But research can also mean workplace experiences, projects, developments that you've presented, that you want to analyze, reflect on, and describe in a form that is suitable for publication. Case studies, critical reflections. So basically anything that is happening in your environment that can be used to create knowledge for other people. So we take this broad definition of research in this presentation today. Before we continue, we have two questions for you just to get a sense of our audience. And I will ask Angela to create a little poll. So one is, have you published research before, and do you plan to publish your research in the future? Hopefully this has popped up on your screen.
Yep, people are taking part.
So we'll take a few seconds for you to just give us indication of your experience so far and your future intentions. Angela, you let us know when we are ready. So your mic is muted.
Yes, we seem to have most people do that. We've had 42% on the first question said yes, they had published. 58% said no. And do you plan to publish your research in the future? Yes, said 42%. No, said 8%, and maybe said 50%.
That's good. That's a nicely balanced audience of people who already have experience, those who are somewhere in between, and those who don't have experience yet, but are hopefully here to get encouraged and motivated to publish in the future. Thank you very much for that. We will now continue with why we need to write up our research for publication. And Amanda, over to you.
So we're part of professions, and professions require professional knowledge, and they need research that extends that professional knowledge. Once the research has been done, it's communicated in many different ways, including presenting at conferences and sharing in workplaces, and also, of course, publishing. So we thought it's really important that your research is published or made public in some way. Otherwise, it is lost or hidden. Great to turn up to a conference and present, but unless people are at the conference, they'll miss out on the benefit of what you've done. So publishing is one of the best ways of documenting your research and disseminating it more widely. We're going to start by looking at three reasons, or three types of reasons why you might publish. And Maya, if you can flick onto the next slide, please.
Sure.
Thanks. So there's lots of reasons, and the first group is the self-interest or personal reasons. Often this is around recognition of your effort. You've done something, you want to make it available to other people so they know what you've done. It's a really good way of helping you have enthusiasm and motivation in your own work, and it promotes you and helps establish you as the authority or expert on a particular topic, even if it's a really small and narrowly framed topic. It's also a great way of helping you keep up to date, because in writing more formal research up or writing up workplace projects in a formal context, you need to do quite a bit of reading of the literature to set your research in that context. And it can be very good for career advancement as well. It's a way of demonstrating to management that you're not just turning up and doing your job fabulously every day, but you're engaging with the profession in a wider sense. Next slide, Maja. There are also some more professional and altruistic reasons. So I talked about a profession requiring a body of professional knowledge. So writing for publication is about sharing that knowledge with other LIS professionals. It helps foster and develop engagement with other researchers, which is not necessarily just locally, but others researching in the area internationally. It helps set your research in a context too. And Maja and I are both aware that there is not a huge amount of New Zealand research that's published in comparison with, say, North America or the UK, and providing New Zealand cases and examples, especially perhaps in research where we're demonstrating Indigenous engagement and perspective, is a really important reason to provide information in a published environment. It also is a great motivation for others to research and publish worldwide. I'm just, okay. And she's just reminded me that Library Life is actually a good way to publish some articles about your research, perhaps not full research papers, because at the moment we don't have a professional journal for LIANZA. We'll talk about how to select journals in a few slides. Thanks, Maja.
And there are also several other reasons. I think, Amanda, you covered it nicely, but one reason is to create a more permanent record of research in the field. So if you remember a situation when you attended the conference, it was a couple of years ago, and there was this really, really interesting presentation. And then when you try to find it again in a couple of years, you can't really remember. There isn't a proper record. So publishing also addresses problems such as this. It creates a permanent record of research and something you can go back to and reuse again. It also promotes your organization or workplace. So presuming you are writing about your organization in a good way, it's a good promotion and marketing strategy as well. But it also brings attention to either your specific field of work within the profession, but also to the profession itself, so to libraries, and if we want entire glamour sector. It brings attention to the sector and communicates the value to the wider community. So by publishing, by talking about relevant topics, relevant projects, and making that permanent record, we are creating a base of knowledge that wider community can use, that newspapers can pick up. So we are kind of shaping the face of the profession in the society as well. So these are some of the other reasons for publishing. And now, how to get started, Amanda?
Okay, one of the initial ways to get started is drop your ideas into a blank page, do a mind mapping of what's really enthusing you about your job or something you've read recently or a situation in the wider environment. AI is very hot at the moment. But if you're not sure about where you might want to go with that, start from something you've already written. So start from an assignment. If you've been studying, is there a topic that you've researched that you want to go further with? Have you written a blog post or something on social media? Have you written an article for a newsletter internally? Did you do this big rave in the staff room one day about a particular aspect that you might want to write up? You can also convert a presentation into a paper, and you'll see that both Maja and I are quite keen on communicating this idea that it's really great to present at a conference. That's fabulous, but it's even better if you then document that in a more permanent way. So others can find it in a few years' time, or that you can communicate with a new audience. That's a really great way of developing your research, because you'll have had feedback from the people at the conference. You've got some idea of their reactions. You'll know the questions they asked and what you might need to write into a more formal version of your paper. Now, you might want to write up a particular collection. How did it go? What were the challenges? What were the strengths of the project? This requires collaboration and planning, but it's a really good way of sharing the writing load, and it means it does all on you. And writing in a team is a good way of keeping motivated. You can actually do a research project, and often we've done them, they don't necessarily get written up, and that can be hard, going from I've done all the research, I've collected the data, I've analysed it, now what do I do? So I've got some suggestions here of what are the next steps you can do to actually get to the writing stage and looking at publication. And Research SIG has some mentors, and we're happy as a committee to talk to anybody, so please do reach out and talk to us about that. The final thing, which is the most work of all, is create a book proposal. You might have a lot to say. You might have a career where you want to draw threads together from it and present something that hasn't well been covered before. Your starting point there is to go to the publishers who publish in our field and look at their proposal forms. They've all got them, and to see what kind of a structure you might be able to put together for a book. You also want to see what else exists, and that's quite important when you're writing more formal research up, but you'll be doing a literature review probably for most of it anyway. Okay. Thanks, Maja.
Yep. So once you've identified that you want to write and what type of what style or what type of publication would suit you best, usually you start thinking about journals. But before you do that, think once again about the contribution your paper brings. This very often aligns with all the reasons that Amanda explained behind why you write, but it can also be another opportunity to really deeply reflect on the so what question. So why does your paper matter and what contribution it brings? We often talk about building knowledge and building knowledge about our specific Aotearoa New Zealand context, but also think about how this context relates to the international context. So how can we build knowledge within New Zealand, but also create something that is of value for an international audience? And that is something that requires a little bit of explaining and the right balance when you are planning to publish in an international journal. Contribution can also be increasing knowledge in a particular area. So if you are a passionate reader of academic and professional journals, and you see that there is a topic that you very rarely come across and you would like to see something written about it more, you can be the person writing about it. So raising that knowledge in a particular area is another reason. Or simply raising awareness of problems that exist in a profession in practice and offering ideally strategies or solutions. You can provide example of best practice, and that can be your contribution, whether that is through your own experience or presenting something that your organization did. But here, just be mindful when you're presenting projects from your organization, there's that need to balance organizational context with organizational privacy. So think about how others will read about your organization and what actually permissions you need to have in place before going and publishing about it. So these are all contributions behind, and as I said, they very often align with the reasons why you write. There is also one point to make here, and that is thinking about how to write about your contribution. Very often we presume just because we write about something, it is important, but that is not always so visible to others. So think about how you can explain your contribution in a very clear way, and how you can make it very obvious, ideally as soon as possible, because you want to capture your reader's attention. That's why contribution is usually described in an abstract, but also in the introduction, where you say, you know, why does it matter to read and publish this paper? And then you can go back to it throughout the paper, especially in the discussion and conclusion section. And we will talk about sections of the paper later. You can also clarify what makes it an original contribution. Now, this is one very vague and overstated word sometimes, originality and original contribution. And sometimes you feel like, well, yes, it is a valuable contribution, but I'm not so sure if it's entirely original. But do your best just to explain why you see it as original. And sometimes keeping things simple and being honest can really demonstrate the value behind your contribution. You can also think outside the immediate context. So sometimes showing examples of best practice can be of value to other similar types of libraries, for example, but you can think outside the context, think what contribution your paper can bring to other sectors, but also to the community, to the society in general. So you can describe it in that way as well. So that was about contribution, and now to Amanda for selecting a journal.
Okay, so you've got it written, you're in the middle of writing, you've thought about your contribution, and now you're looking at exactly which journal you're going to submit to. And maybe you've got some idea, or maybe you haven't. Your first question is, what kind of research is it? Is this an informal project that you want to write 2,000 words about, or 1,000 words about, just to let people know it's going on? An industry magazine is going to be ideal for that. Is it going to be something rather more formal that you want to write 4,000 to 5,000 words, or 8,000 words, which is about the limit of a full research paper? What's your ideal audience? Who do you actually want to get in touch with for this research? Who will benefit from it? If you've written the conference paper and you've presented it, is there an issue of the conference proceedings that you can submit to? Can you prompt the conference organisers to organise something? And sometimes there's often a track into a journal that you haven't noticed, or that they haven't promoted very well. So you can go to a particular journal to publish. And the other initial question to think about is, do you want to publish open access or behind paywalls? There are some there are good reasons for either way, but those are the initial questions to keep in mind. Thanks, Maja.
And then sorry, is this my slide or your slide?
Your slide.
As you can see, we are very keen to talk about all these issues. Also, something to keep in mind when you are selecting a journal, what can help you select a journal is where do authors or ideas or papers you cited in your paper, where were they published? So who or what have you cited, and could you publish in the same journal? You will very often find yourself in a situation where you read and cite authors publishing in one journal, or several authors publishing their papers in the same journal. So that journal might be a good opportunity or a good place for your paper as well. Or you might go somewhere completely different and try to publish your paper in a journal that hasn't covered that topic. So something to think about. What can also guide your decision is so-called lists of journals. We have a few listed here on the slide, and we also have links on the last slide among additional resources. And these lists often give you, top 20 or top 50 in the field, so you can see, what are the highly ranked journal and or mostly read journal, or depending on what the rationale behind ranking is. You can also ask research active colleagues for recommendations, what are good journals, and also think about your immediate community and where your audience that you want to reach is actually. So how to find a way to your audience through selecting a journal. You can consider something called journal impact factors that show the ranking and the value of the journal. This might be more important to you if you are in a university setting or somewhere where this is relevant for promotion. But that said, journal impact factors are not certainly the only factors showing the relevance and importance of the journal. So they should be taken in account compared to other criteria for selecting a journal. And you should also consider, does speed of publishing matter to you? So sometimes if you want to have paper published very quickly and you can tell that the journal has a longer process, that might not be the best place, or the other way around. And the way you can tell that is, apart from reading information for authors on journals' web pages, you can also look at the previously published issues, and there is usually on top of, on the homepage of every article, you can see when the article has been submitted, when it has been reviewed, and when it has been published. So that gives you some sort of idea about how lengthy the process is. So that can help guide your decision.
Okay, so you've been through your journal lists, you've done your research, you've done your homework for this, and now you've got a short list and you need to do some hard thinking about it. So what are the kinds of criteria or the sorts of aspects that you need to be looking at? The first thing really is to read the journal's about page and be quite ruthless about deciding whether your paper is likely to fit with that journal's scope. One of the reasons editors reject papers is because they're just out of scope with the journal, and there's a journal for everything. So if you've picked one and it doesn't look really like your research is there, you can't actually drag the editor the way you want to go. You might need to pick another journal. If you are really keen to publish in a particular journal, you can email the editor and say, I'm writing a paper about this. Are you interested in publishing it? And then you'll know. And journal editors get those kinds of communications all the time. The second thing that you can look at is who the editor or editors are and the editorial board members. Now, you might not publish somewhere if you haven't heard of these people, but it's a good way of evaluating the quality of the journal and seeing whether the research is a good fit. So it's easy to find information about people. It's easy to look them up in Google Scholar. It's easy to check journal databases, see what the editorial board have published themselves, see what the editors published, look at what is said about the journal. Another thing that is relevant for us in New Zealand is to consider the geographical focus. Now, we don't currently have a library professional journal. We do have an archives one. And there, I don't think we have a records one either at the moment. So you might want to look outside of those areas if you want to publish in a New Zealand journal, or look to Australasia or Southeast Asia or Oceania. All these journals are more likely to have something that will not at least discount your experience. And one of the things you can find with journals that say they're international, but they come out of North America or Europe, is they're really not as international as they think. And they see New Zealand research as perhaps less relevant to their readers, which is fair enough, it may well be. So keep that in mind. Another thing to consider is whether there is a peer review process for the journal and whether you want to go through one. Some journals, there are pros and cons for both. Some journals allow you to choose, but mostly they don't. They either have one or they don't have one. Magazine-style publications are less likely to have a peer review process, so you won't get any critique or feedback other than from the editor. When they do have a peer review process, that can be extremely helpful, if slightly bruising at times, to get other people's opinions on how you've packaged that research together in the article, how you've presented it, how you've explained it. Maja emphasized before the importance of saying in the introduction what your contribution is. That's something I always look for when I get sent papers to the journals I'm involved with. Do I know in the introduction why this paper matters and what is important about it? And reviewers will look for that too. The final consideration perhaps is to go back to your ideal audience. Are they likely to read this journal? If you're taking a slightly different angle on a topic, that may be relevant to introduce this journal's ideal audience to your research, but it may not be who you hope to target in the first place. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, a bit more from me. There are a few pitfalls, and one of the ones that we're both aware of is author processing charges. So this is when the publisher requires you to pay them money to publish your paper. You don't have to pay to get published. There are plenty of journals out there that are keen for the content, and if you get accepted in a paper and they suddenly start talking about author processing charges, which can be in the thousands, you can withdraw your paper at that point. Some publishers offer, which are behind paywalls, offer a green or gold open access route if you pay. You might decide, or if you're writing up a workplace project, your employer might decide that actually it's worth paying to have that in a quality journal, but also open access. There's no right or wrong here. Just be aware that these things exist, but they're not mandatory everywhere. Now, check out the copyright in advance if you can. Who holds it? So in some journals, the publisher holds it, and you can't do anything with that paper. You can't even send people copies of it. A lot of them will allow you, though, to have a preprint version in an open access repository or an institutional repository, or to supply copies like that. And the Emerald journals, for example, do that. They let you put preprint where you want, but not the published version of the journal. The final pitfall is predatory publishers and journals. Now, you're all professionals, information professionals, and I know you'll have come across this before, and I know you'll probably have helped clients in some of your academic libraries in particular work out whether this is a predatory journal or not. But there are some tools to help you, and Think, Check, Submit is a really good place to start, as is the Open Access Journal information about predatory journal publishers. Many predatory publishers will automatically do an author processing charge, and if they say, we will accept all papers and you just have to pay us, and then you dig down and it's €1,000, that's probably one to steer away from. Find a journal without it. And go with your gut. If you think something's not quite right about a publisher, it probably is. There are certainly ways of checking. There are certainly people you can ask, but in the end, there's other possibilities. Don't feel tied to going with one particular publisher.
Thank you, Amanda. So now that you've sort of identified or have a clear idea of how to identify a suitable journal, it's a good time to think about outline of your paper. As Amanda said at the beginning, there are different types of paper, which means their purpose is different, which also means their outline might be different, whether it's a short or long research article, whether it's a magazine or newspaper article, or something more like an opinion piece. An outline of a typical research article where you present a research will have these key sections. So you will start with the title, ideally something attractive and motivating, but also something that reflects clearly what the paper will be about. Then abstract and keywords, which should convey key information about the paper. And keep in mind that very often people will read just abstract and keywords, and then based on that decide whether they want to read the rest or not. So be very specific and clear in this first part of your paper. Then comes an introduction, and in introduction section explains the motivation behind the work, but also gives some key ideas of why this topic matters and how you will tackle it, and as we said, what your contribution or what the value of this paper will be. Then the typical research article will have a literature review section, whether it's called literature review or previous works or theoretical background or something like that. But the idea behind is to show what the existing knowledge about the topic is, and to be able to position your paper in that existing knowledge, to show where the gaps are and how your paper will address a gap. Depending on the type of an article, your literature review can be relatively short, but it can be very extensive. So it depends, but it should give some indication of where your paper sits within previous knowledge and what the previous knowledge is. Then usually comes the methodology section. So regardless of what type of research you conducted, there is some methodology behind it. So you had to have a way of answering your research questions and collecting data. And this section describes what methods you took, what was your sample, how you collected your data, how you analyzed it. And the purpose of this section is not just for you to explain how you did things, but to give that rigor and credibility to your research. So to show that you didn't make it up, that there actually is a methodology and scientific approach to the research you conducted. And it is only after the methodology that you will present your findings or your results, and then move to what actually are the most important part, discussion and conclusion. So why do those findings matter? And what you can do with them. And discussion section is usually an opportunity for you to go deeper and to analyze and to explain to readers why your findings matter and how they relate to that literature that you used in the literature review. So what new knowledge you've created, how do you contribute to the knowledge about the topic, and how do you close some of the existing gaps in that specific area. And then you will conclude, summarizing the main points, maybe pointing to future research. So when you are looking for ideas for research, it's always good to look at conclusion section, because usually authors will describe there everything that still needs to be done, so you can have good ideas from there. And then finish with the references or lists of items that you used throughout your article. There are a couple of things to keep in mind. Author guidelines. So journals might have different expectations around how to structure or how to create an outline of your paper. So do check first what the requirements there are. And it's also good to look at journal keywords, journal audience, the scope of journal one more time, just to make sure you have that terminology right and that outline to actually meet expectations of the paper. One thing that I often struggle still after many years of experience in publishing papers is getting the ratios of sections right. So you can often end up writing long literature review and introduction, and it feels like by the time you've explained why you are going to write about the topic, you realize that you have only half a page or page left to do everything else, which is a good point to go back and revisit. So while you might be in a situation to write up as much as you want while you are writing, at some point you need to think about that there needs to be a balance between sections in your paper, so that each of these sections have their suitable scope and place in your paper. Also, when Amanda and I were preparing this presentation, we agreed, don't write to the word limit, which is tempting, when you are dealing with 6,000 or 8,000 words, you really want to use the last single one of them. But it is very likely, if your paper is going through a peer review process, that your reviewers will ask for some changes. Which usually means explaining something additionally or adding things. And in that case, you will need some room. So leave room to make changes post-revision process. We probably don't have enough time to go into details of how to cope with revision requests, but just keep in mind that this is a very rewarding process, but it can be a very emotional process. And when somebody comes back and criticizes your work and you've spent hours and days and months investing your heart and soul in it, sometimes it's hard to take that critique. But the idea behind the review process is to make your paper better. And most of the reviewers will try to do that, to give you constructive criticism and really help you to make your paper better. So prepare yourself and find some ways to cope with criticism so you can grow through the process and in the end produce a better paper. And then you've published. Yes, you can go and celebrate, but this is not the end of the process. So think about how you can promote your paper. We talked about contributions behind publishing a paper, and we said that one of the main reasons for publishing is to create additional knowledge. keeping the paper to yourself, and in some, depending on your personality, depending on your cultural background, you might find it a bit hard to go and brag about, hey, I published a research, so everybody should read it. But that actually is really important. So think about how can you improve findability? How can you promote your paper, either through your own social media or your employer's social media? You can add details about your paper to your email signature. You can talk about it in your workplace. You can let participants from your research know it has been published. If this paper hasn't been written after a conference presentation, consider presenting it at a conference or at another conference, because we can all talk about the same topics from many different angles. So there just might be another conference and another audience that you would like to present it to. Network with other researchers, and if there is an institutional repository in your organization, you can deposit it there. And that very often addresses the question of open access and copyright, because most publishers allow you to submit something that's called preprint. So a version of a paper that is almost the same as the formally accepted one, but might have some differences. So you can deposit it there. So just keep in mind that process after you've celebrated what you can do to promote. And now we have practitioner perspectives on publishing. Amanda, would you like to introduce Michael?
I'll start. So I'd like to thank Michael for agreeing to come along and talk about what he's published. Michael's a reference librarian at the Wellington Medical and Health Sciences Library, but about to move to National Library on Monday. So we've just got him there. So Michael was a student of mine at one point, and his article, as a result of his research, Libraries of Babel, Exploring Library Language and its Suitability for the Community, was published in 2017. Michael, take it away.
Hey, kia ora koutou. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Yeah, I just wrote down a few talking points thinking back on my experience with publishing my article. So mine kind of came out of the research paper that I did at the Open Polytechnic. So it's sort of something I'd already worked on as an assignment. So one initial challenge is sort of coming up with the idea or this kind of specific angle that you want to go for. But once you've got your idea and you kind of know what direction you're going in, you just got to sort of get stuck in and do it, really. I got a lot of encouragement from people around me, which was really helpful. So if you can reach out to like a research mentor or a colleague that knows a bit about publishing an article and stuff, it can be incredibly helpful. So Amanda helped me tons with all my sort of questions and reviewing the work and that sort of thing. I'm not sure that she's open to other people sending her emails about that or anything.
Yep, quite happy.
Oh yeah. So in terms of my experience, it was a lot of hard work, but it was really fun as well, and it's really valuable, and it's a great feeling to be able to contribute to sort of the wider library literature knowledge and that sort of thing. Also, being cited by someone else is really quite a buzz. So I've been cited about 8 times, and it's just each time it's really exciting, and I go through and find what they've said about my article and that sort of thing. It's really cool. And I've been tweeted as well, which was very exciting. So it was also been a really useful exercise in terms of my work in an academic library. So being aware of the process that's involved, because I've done it, that's really quite useful for dealing with other people who are going through that same process, and sort of just that knowledge comes in handy. So be prepared to rewrite some sentences hundreds of times. And there's quite a bit of paperwork involved as well. especially if you're doing like an ethics application, which I didn't do for this particular paper, but I have done for another research project that I'm working on. And you kind of spend a lot of time staring at the screen, trying to figure out what they want with what particular questions and things. And I'll just reiterate that to be prepared for reviewer feedback. Try not to take it personally. My heart did sink a little bit when I got the reviewer feedback after I'd submitted my article, because there was all these things that they had said, but don't take it personally, and you can disagree with what they say if you feel really strongly about it, and just make sure that you explain why you disagree. And yeah, so just give it a go. It's a really worthwhile experience, and maybe start off small if you want to in sort of the LIANZA publication, and just be aware of time frame. That came up before as well. I think it took me from the moment I decided to go ahead with publishing, it took me about 6 months, I think, from that sort of decision until it was actually accepted for publication. And then beyond that, it took a little bit longer for it to actually show up in a journal issue. So it can take a little bit of time. So yeah, just be aware of that. And yeah, that's kind of it from me. I really enjoyed it. So if you're sort of on the fence, definitely just give it a go.
Thanks very much, Michael. That sounds really great. And yeah, I'm happy to talk to people about the publishing process. And I'm the regional editor of a couple of library journals in the field. So yeah, people can approach me.
And now we have our second practitioner, Caitlin. Welcome, Caitlin. Caitlin worked as a library assistant at Christchurch City Libraries, and while working there, she did a very nice research project on perspectives of homeless library customers. And now Caitlin works as an education manager. So Caitlin will tell us a little bit about her experiences.
Kia ora koutou. Yes, thanks for having me today. I probably have quite a similar experience to Michael, I think, in a lot of ways. But yeah, just for some context, I did my master's at Vic Uni a few years ago. Maya was one of my lecturers, so I'm having flashbacks now listening to her over Zoom, which is quite cool. Good flashbacks. She was also the supervisor for my master's research project, which, yes, as Maya said, I looked at the some perspectives of some of our homeless customers on the way they use the library and whether that impacts on their social inclusion or not. Christchurch City Libraries at the time in Turanga, the central branch, had a specialist role of a communities liaison who worked with our homeless customers and associated agencies, and I just thought that was really cool. Yeah, probably like all of you, the impact of public libraries on social issues was I just love it. Anyway, so that's why I chose that topic for my research. When I'd finished the project and it was marked, Maya and the moderator both suggested that I look at publishing it, and I thought about it and didn't do anything about it because, you know, I thought, I've just spent so long working on it, I don't want to do anything else, and also a bit of imposter syndrome as well. You think, you know, who's going to care, who's going to want to read about what I've studied. But my manager at the time, when I spoke to her about it, she said that she had always regretted not publishing her own research project, and she really encouraged me to do it. And so I thought, okay, yes, I'm going to do it. It would be great to get it out there and try and contribute to that body of knowledge if it can help other libraries to help their marginalised customers, then, you know, it's definitely worth doing. I noticed that some of the articles that I had cited were written by past students with their supervisors, and so I thought I'll ask Maya if she's keen to co-author it with me. And that would be one of my top tips as well, is to see if you can get a mentor or a co-author, somebody who's got, you know, so much experience in publishing, and they know the process, they know what to expect, how to frame what you're writing, all the formatting, all that kind of stuff that you might not realize, especially the first time that you do it. So yeah, and like Michael said, we sort of had to look at which particular finding or how we wanted to frame what we were doing. I had to cut it down quite a lot. That was probably one of the pitfalls, I guess, is you spent so long on this project and you've got it down, you think as much as you can, and then you've got to cut out another sort of 3,000 words. So that was difficult, but a good, a worthwhile exercise, and it really kind of hones in on the point that you're trying to get across. But yeah, I think also during that time, COVID came along. So at times I was thinking, what am I doing? I should have, why am I doing all this extra work? But the pleasures of it are definitely worthwhile. I think I enjoy writing anyway. So in itself, that was a good process. I presented on my research at a LIANZA weekend school and a couple of sort of internal work events, and people, a couple of librarians from other regions asked me about the research because they wanted to implement similar things in their libraries. So it was really great to be able to say, well, actually, I'm just in the process of getting it published, so I'll send you a copy when it's done. And knowing that sort of like a tangible way of seeing that your research is impacting the sector. And I don't actually work in the GLAM industry anymore. I loved it, but I left to find a sort of more family-friendly role in terms of the hours. So maybe I'll come back one day, we'll see. But I think the process of publishing gave me a lot of transferable skills. I have to write proposals and reports and things in my current role. So I think a lot of that persuasive writing that I had to do during the publishing process really helped with that. So yeah, what else have I written down? It's all flooding back to me now. I think, yeah, my top tips, like I said, would be to get a mentor or a co-author or someone that can help you along the way. Actually, yeah, it's been said a couple of times today, but the peer review process, like everybody has said, can be a bit, I think you said, bruising and emotional, and I would agree with that. But the great thing about having Maja was that she could see that actually it wasn't as bad as I might have thought, because she's used to it, and she knows what they're saying and what they're actually asking for is maybe not as much as it seems. And obviously once you pass that peer review process, you get that validation that your research is robust and worth sharing. And yeah, my other tip is don't think about the you need to get over the imposter syndrome. If you've spend a long time on this research and you think it's worth sharing, then it definitely is. And like Michael said, getting cited is a really cool feeling because you think, okay, someone does actually think it's worth reading what I've written. So yeah.
Thank you both, Caitlin and Michael. I think these are very valuable perspectives and experiences, and I hope participants today will find them useful as well. So very soon we will open floor for questions, but just to round this up with pleasures and pitfalls. So final summary of our presentation today. Amanda and I agree that there are many more pleasures compared to pitfalls. So if you are still on the verge, should I or should I not? I will talk about the pleasures first. So it's fun to write. Pratchett would agree, definitely. Writing is the most fun you can have by yourself, as Terry Pratchett said. It demonstrates your achievements. It contributes to knowledge, so that there's this really, really deep value in writing and publishing. It is a sign of professional development. It improves your profile and reputation. It looks good on your CV when you can, add that section, publications, and then you have something that's written. But it's really a rewarding process, both in terms of, as Caitlin said, creating those transferable skills, but also developing the knowledge and contributing to your profession and your sector. Some pitfalls, of course, exist as always. In any situation, your paper might not be accepted the first time. You might be asked to revise it in a way that you're not really comfortable. It's time consuming, it takes time, and it might be slow to see the impact. So it's great, as Michael said, when you see that somebody cited you, and especially when they cited you correctly and got to the point of your paper. But sometimes it might take years for citations to start coming through, and especially if you write about very specific topic or a niche topic, your audience might not be so big. So prepare yourself that there might be that lag time between publishing and actually getting some recognition and impact. With that, I think we will conclude here and open to questions, but we would just like for you to take this encouragement that it is possible to do it. It is rewarding rather than painful, and it's a really good way to develop your own career, but also profession in general. And with that, over to you, Amanda, to moderate questions.
Okay, so is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to know about at this point? We realize that there's been a lot that we've put into this, so you might have questions and you can come back to us later if that's the case. The next slide, which we'll pull up in a moment, has got just a grab bag of a few resources, including links to some of the things we talked about in the presentation. So, any questions? Thanks, Lauren.
So we can see each other better.
Are there any plans to bring back the New Zealand Library and Information Journal? I'm not sure where that's up to. Perhaps Angie can comment.
Well, I do know that Anna has had many conversations with people. It does take quite a few resources, and people, we've not managed to set up an editorial board or a journal. We do try and use Library Life as much as possible. It does highlight areas where people have been doing research, and I know that, I have worked with Anne Golding at Te Herenga Waka to actually get some research projects that through into Library Life. So it's not an academic journal, of course, but it is certainly a good way of getting information out to the sector, and that's the main purpose for it. So it's often an option to put in some research projects that might be particularly relevant, to the wider sector. But at the moment, the journal's not going.
No. The archives journal I mentioned is Archifacts, and that's publishing, I think, twice a year, and they've now got 3 editors on the editorial board. Maja is one of the editors, and another of them is Sarah Welland, who's one of the Library and Information Studies lecturers at the Open Polytechnic. And then I've completely gone blank on where the 3rd editor works, but she's a professional archivist. J. Alia, which is Alia's journal, is a possibility for publishing. There's quite a bit of New Zealand content that goes into that. I'm the editor of what used to be called Library Review, but now is called Global Knowledge, Memory and Communication, and that's one of the Emerald journals. And there's quite a few that I would encourage you to consider. There are lots of open access journals out there, and the one, again, that I'm most familiar with is Information Research, and I'm the regional editor for that. Maja, have you got any other journal titles that come to mind? There's JOLIS, Journal of Library and Information Science, which I think Anne Goulding's the editor of.
Yes, I published quite a few articles in Journal of Documentation and found that quite a quick one to go through.
That's another of the Emerald journals as well. Yep. So there's certainly plenty of possibilities, but you're certainly welcome to come and ask us if you're not sure about something.
And if I may jump just with one question for the audience. So what do you see as the biggest barrier to starting your publishing journey?
Can I just stop you just for a second? We've got 4 minutes. So can we just make this the last question? The last, response, sure.
If anybody wants to comment, but if not, happy to take any other question in these 4 minutes.
Time. Yep, absolutely, Donna. It's always time.
Seems like time is our #1 factor.
This is where co-authoring can be very helpful, because there's 2 of you to share the writing load and all the tasks and all the processing and the dealing with revisions, and Caitlin mentioned some of that, and I really support that as well. Co-authoring is a very helpful way.
And when you feel like giving up, then you are responsible to somebody else, so it's not just you. You will disappoint.
Okay, let's wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along to the presentation. We hope you found it useful. We haven't covered all of the possible points, but it was a quick run through. If you're presenting at the LIANZA conference later in the year, you might want to come back and revisit this to look at what you might do to write up your presentation. I'm just going to drop a link into the chat as well. This is for the IFLA journal, and it's the New Zealand, Australia and Pacific version of the webinar, which Anne Goulding and I were involved in a couple of years ago. So this is very specifically about the IFLA journal, but that's another possibility for publishing as well.
Okay, I'll just say the karakia for, and thank you very much, Maja and Amanda. That was really informative. And sorry, I had to get Library Life out there. You can see what I'm involved with. So I'll just say the closing karakia. Unuia, anuia, anuia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, e te ara, tangata, koia rā e rongo, whakairia ake ki runga, kia tina, huie, taikie. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.